All right, first up, if you've been living under a rock, you know the XFL and CFL officially agreed to end their talks. The XFL is going to play in 2023. We told you this. Our own Mike Mitchell told you this, and you didn't listen. You thought we were dumb, and you thought we were whatever. He told you. So the Canadian Football League released the following statement first on our talks with the XFL, exploring the potential corroboration has been positive and constructive while we remain open to finding new ways to work together in the future. We and our XFL counterparts have jointly decided not to pursue any formal agreements at this time. We, the CFL, are squarely focused on preparing for August 5th season. Blah, 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 blah. And Dave Naylor said, sounds like the CFL has ended talks with the owners of the XFL without entering any formal agreement. He put that out. Now, the XFL, we reached out to the XFL, and this is the statement that they gave us. Quote, while our discussions with the CFL did not ultimately lead to a collaboration, the effort reinforced our belief and commitment to developing the XFL for international spring football. Pay attention to that. We'll get into that in a second. We look forward to seeing everyone in the kickoff in spring of 2023. Also, clearly, pay attention to that. So what was interesting about this part is that the CFL had this very formal press release where the XFL did not. So part of me was like, was the XFL, I mean, I assume that they knew it was coming, but did they, I mean, you got to remember the XFL doesn't have a big staff. They do have PR and some other things. I was just kind of surprised that the XFL didn't have some kind of formal thing, but hey, using CFL or XFL News Hub to get your message out, that's kind of what we're here for. Two, I thought that was kind of interesting. Was the XFL taken off guard by this? Who knows? Does it really matter? But one thing they did say, there's two things. The international spring football, and then XFL is returning in 2023, which Mike Mitchell told you a long time ago. That's why we have the best crew, and that's why we're going to take that energy, that superpower. It's like the Avengers of spring football is now going to focus on CFL football as well on CFL News Hub and a CFL show, et cetera, et cetera. So that was that. Some more details surrounding. Now, at first, when that whole message came out, it was like, oh, the CFL told the XFL to go bye-bye. Not necessarily. That's might not be exactly what it was. So I put out this one. And just some quotes. So Mike Mitchell said that he believed that both sides could not come to an agreement on the business side of things. Both the XFL and CFL narrowed down their options for business alignment, but could never work out a formal arrangement. While some speculated that there will be a potential on-field merger, the talks never got to that point. It was all about the grand-scale business alignment, something that we had talked about, Mike Mitchell has talked about. Others have not. Everybody was like, they're doing a full-blown merger. And I'll get into sources that you can kind of trust when it comes to some of this stuff in a little bit. Also, a source told Mike Mitchell about the deal between two sides that it was too complex. And that is complex. He said, from what I've been told, both sides have been working for months on potential options for collaboration on the business end, but were unable to formalize an agreement in their extensive talks. Farhan Lalji said, a frequent guest on the Markcast, you could check him out. They had him on right after this news broke. Says they just could not get a formal business model that was going to make sense to both sides. And from an XFL perspective, I think they really wanted to get this moving along, given the specter of the USFL beginning to play with a television deal in 2022. Not really sure about this USFL thing. He goes on to say the XFL had some issues with what they were bringing to the table. The XFL had a number of holes in what they were necessarily offering. Kind of a different side of thing. Dave Naylor says that the CFL governance feels better where they are now than they did when talks began, based partly on the new gambling revenue that was passed. He said, I think teams are very bullish on what this might ultimately mean to their bottom line, revenue sharing and other belt tightening across the CFL, makes a business model, blah, blah, blah. So that's what you kind of get. The change in position with the XFL and the new gambling revenue doesn't mean the CFL is out of the water. According to Dave Naylor, the league's business model and MLSE's view on things have not gone away. I put this specifically in there on July 7th, okay? I put that in there. He said the CFL, though, still has real questions about its business model in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. And we know the Argonauts, under the ownership of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, they were most bullish teams when it came to pursuing the XFL partnership. Now that it's not going to happen, what is the long-term future as owner of the Argonauts? And, of course, they helped usher in the new owners of the Montreal Alouettes. So there'll certainly be some questions hanging along when it comes to that. So that was kind of how things ended. It was like, well, maybe it was never about rules. It was never about, ratios. None of that was ever discussed, clearly, because they didn't even come to a formal agreement. But it was like, okay, so who broke up with who and why became the next kind of, what's going on there? Well, of course, the next day, Super XFL Insider, XFL, should we just call him XFL Hall of Fame writer already? Mike Mitchell. So he came out with an article on XFL News Club. And this is a quote from somebody within the talks. All right? It says, our plan for alignment is so complicated and multi-layered that I fear. Now remember, any of these things that come out, and we'll get into that in a second, they know it's putting it out there. So they want this message out there. It says, quote, our plan for alignment is so complicated and multi-layered that I fear that all the top decision makers won't sign off on any of our final options. We have exhausted so many possibilities for alignment that will significantly benefit both sides, and we have used analysis to break down why this would work financially. Still, we keep hitting snags in these talks because we can't get everyone on the same page that shares the same vision. This is an anonymous source involved in the XFL talks. That is a very telling thing. What is the deal with that statement and why was it said? Basically, and Mike Mitchell goes in depth, and as he always does in all of this stuff. Check out his article about the inside story on the talks, and how it's was never going to be a merger and all this other stuff. But basically, what you had was two things with this. Well, let's just get to this part. Basically, the gist of the story is that the certain ownerships, the community, basically at the end of the day, the ownership group that are community owned, that are not as interested in profit, and Mike Mitchell talks about this on the Markcast, were really never going to say yes to anything. We know homers in the CFL world that they don't want their league touched. They don't want anything to do with anybody else. It's perfectly fine the way it is. We're not changing the rules. We're not changing the business model. We're not hiring anybody new and young to draw younger audiences. We're not doing any of that stuff. We're fine with the status quo per se. Maybe we don't even want a revenue share because you're all on your own. Very old school thinking, very old school money type mindset where MLSC is, it could, whether they were the villain or not, we don't know. They were, trying to take a modern approach, kind of upgrade things. You got your people that still have their VCRs versus people that surf the internet and use like Roku and Hulu and stuff. You know what I mean? Just completely different mindsets. You got old school money versus, but then it's corporate. I get both sides. It's a tough thing. But in the end, to me, the way the tea leaves read to me is that the XFL, you got to remember all the different players they brought in, like experts in the field to do analysis, to tell them, like, hey, this is what we can do here. You have a problem with this? Okay, well, fine. Bringing them analysis. So, hey, look at this. Da, 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 da. No. It's like almost that they never wanted to say yes to begin with. And then finally, I believe the XFL just had enough. And they were like, all right, we're done. Like, we're done with this chit chatter. We tried to make it work. We both learned something from each other, and now it's time to move on. And then that was kind of it. But in the background of all of this, I was like, I understand, okay, you got your gambling revenue. And I've said this from the beginning, that even if you get your gambling revenue, like, you still don't pay your players a heck of a lot of money. And your staff, you don't have a big staff either. And none of the teams are really that profitable. So the gambling money is not going to solve your problems. But I think there's people in there that believe that it's going to solve their problems. And it really needs a business model. Is XFL the answer? I think, you heard Randy Ambrosi say they want to focus on a Canadian solution, because I think probably a majority of the ownership in the CFL want that too. And I get that part as well. So it's just this kind of sticky situation. And at some point I was kind of like, you know what? I mean, at first I was like, well, who broke up with who? And then I was like, man, this doesn't look good for the XFL. And then I'm like, I mean, this is over the course of 24 hours. I went through that 5 stages of grief kind of deal. And then I was like, I'm kind of glad that this is over with. And because it just seems so complicated. And there was so much. And again, you're talking about a vocal minority. Because honestly, most people pay attention when the games start. Like 90% of the people pay attention to a league when the game starts. So people are kind of paying attention, but not really. And I really thought that they would bring, I mean, you heard from Canadian media people how much interest in the CFL returned with, this announcement. So it benefited everybody. Now you have, who, claiming that it was a waste. I don't think it was a waste of time at all. I mean, if you have a half a brain, you're going to explore all your options. I don't know if this particular person can walk and chew gum at the same time. So companies do have multiple things going on at the same time. You can have talks, you can work on your season, and you can do other stuff. So that whole argument is just a joke. But it raised some questions for me, because I was like, okay, so now we're done. But all the damage and scars still remain. That there were people that wanted to do business with the XFL that did not get their way. How is that going to go moving forward? So let's move on as the story unfolds. So Mike Mitchell's article came out July 8th. July 10th, new questions emerged from our own Mike Mitchell. So after months of rampant speculation about the talks, supporters finally got their answers, that they're going to go. We all know about the statements. Now, and he brings back this part 2. The XFL is committed to developing the XFL for international spring football. That is 100% put in there on purpose. A statement, the effort, CFL discussions, this is also, he got a statement, reinforced our belief and commitment to developing the XFL for international football. In other words, the XFL's belief in what they had planned internationally and their alignment discussions is stronger now than before the talks began. That international aspect made it very interesting. One of the things that Mike Mitchell talked about on the Markcast, you have to listen to the episode, is could a team, 2 teams emerge? Because remember, the XFL has always said from the beginning that they wanted to add teams. We were thinking, Alabama, we were thinking all other locations. I didn't really think about international right now. So one of the possibilities, and you've got to remember how this game works. Like, these guys put this stuff out there. Listen, I was the one, and I will go home to the bank about the Terrell Owens wide receiver on the list. I was the one that broke that story. That came everywhere instantly. XFL people were all over and said that wasn't true, and I had no problem retracting it. I've said things over the course of the last couple of years, and we've written things. I get instant feedback. Mike Mitchell writing this is not like Mike Mitchell making this up. Like, the XFL does not have a problem with this being out there. Whether it's just to get people interested in talking, or it's actually real, like they're really going down this path and this could happen. Mike Mitchell told you 2023 was going to be the season, was when it was going to happen. So pay attention. So could there be a team in Mexico? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Mexico, huge city. That would be great for the league. It makes a lot of sense. He breaks all the things down about the XFL having a team in Mexico, so that would leave us with 9. Then he threw something else out there, again, that has not been disputed when he did, and we'll get into that more here in a second, but a team in Canada. A team in Canada. Now, where would that team play? In the biggest market you would stick, which would be Toronto. Now this gets interesting. Now, how would the CFL feel about if the XFL set up shop in Canada, vice versa? And I thought about this, but I wasn't going to say anything. One of the other things Mike Mitchell said is that there is talk. There is talk. It's not 100%, but they were thinking about moving the season back into April and May to accommodate potential new teams that come into the XFL, i.e. helping our friends out in Canada because it freaking like snows in August there. I'm joking, but you know what I'm saying. Stuff that I just learned this year. Well, I'm like, well, it's getting nice out here, and places in Canada would have a foot of snow. So that would help the Canada situation. Plus, I don't know if it would necessarily intersect with the CFL season, depending on how they normally do, because he said the XFL season ending in June or July would only go head-to-head against the early portion of the CFL season, since regularly CFL Canadian football seasons start in the middle of June. So that kind of gives you an idea that they wouldn't really be competing. But then this other one was thrown out here, and this is the part where I was thinking about it, but he said it, is that what if the CFL teams jump ship and join the XFL? Again, no one told him this is completely irrational, but there's two possibilities. The XFL could make their own Canadian team, or somebody from the CFL could potentially move to the XFL. And I was like, wow, that's pretty crazy. That is pretty crazy, my friends. And then this story came out. And the funny thing is, this didn't come from us. No, this came from this whole thought. I thought it. I totally thought it. I was like, could you imagine if the Argos jump ship to the XFL? That would be insane. Now, we've heard people say, and I forget who said it, but it was like if the Argos were to leave the CFL, that could potentially crush the league, even though they don't make as much money. People will argue nuances. Well, can they? It's legal. I don't know. I don't know any of that stuff. I'm just telling you, this is put out there. But this wasn't put out by XFL News Hub. No. This was put out by somebody who's going to be on the Markcast this week. Dan Ralph put this out. Now, why normally, and when I heard this, and then so this article about the long-term future of the Toronto Argonauts, question that's facing the CFL, when this article came out, I was like, and it came from Canada, I was like, is this the same dude? And yes, I use that word, dude. So here's the weird thing. When the XFL and CFL made their announcement, instantly, there was one person in Canada. I was a little upset. And I know the XFL listens to this. I was like, yo, why didn't you tell us so we could have an article come out instantly when this announcement was made? But hey, I get it. But in Canada, some guy I'd never heard of, because I didn't know any writer or sports thing. I didn't know anything about Canadian sports. He had a scoop. He had quotes from Danny Garcia in his article just before, basically it came out instantaneously when the XFL CFL announcement was made. Do you know who that guy was? Dan Ralph. He was the one. And I was like, when I heard about this article about the Toronto Argonauts, I was like, if Dan Ralph is the one that wrote this, there is no doubt that they, MLSC and the XFL, want this out there for a reason. Because he was the one. Because if you look at his article from March 10th that came out at 12:04, and this is something that he didn't write in a minute. And if you scroll down, he's got quotes from Danny Garcia. Everything aligned beautifully. The Rock's got his picture about the CFL. And he talks about Dwayne thing here. Here's a quote from Jeffrey Pollock. This is the possibility of a wonderful form. Pollock said it's a nice place to start having a conversation from. So he's got quotes from Jeffrey Pollock and Danny Garcia, the only person in Canada who got the scoop. And now this is the next article that he got the scoop in. Now, what does this article say? The long-term future of the Toronto Argonauts. The 148-year-old franchise has reportedly lost annual losses of $12 million within the league's status quo. This isn't, and look when this came out. Oh, this is updated. July 8th, 5:30. That XFL CFL stuff was, let's see. Dave Naylor said something about it at 10 a.m. So news broke at 10 a.m.-ish. Now, Dan Ralph had a story at 5:30. And it's an extensive story. Now, maybe he worked all day on it, and he's a professional writer, and he's the man. Whether he has connections with MLSC or not, I just showed you that he does have he was the only one to get quotes from the XFL just before that came out. Now, in his article, not only they talk about losing $12 million, and billionaires don't like to lose $12 million. So MLSE owns the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Raptors, Toronto's FC, AHL's Toronto Marlies, and NBA G League's Raptors 509. They also own Scotia Bank Arena, where the home of the Raptors and Leafs, and they manage BMO Field, home of the Argos in Toronto. They manage. They don't own, they manage. He goes on to say, he talks about the $12 million losses. So with the reported annual losses of around $12 million operating within the Canadiens League's status quo, MLSC was the catalyst for the XFL discussions and saw a potential partnership as a way to establish a new structure that could help improve the football's entity's fortune, according to multiple sources. So here you go. That's in it right there. MLSC saw this as potential. Sources were granted anonymity because the MLSE nor the CFL has divulged the exact nature of the talks, blah, blah, blah. So I believe that that's from MLSE telling him what the deal is. Now, not every franchise is in the same boat. However, it became clear that not all CFL franchises shared that same vision. The Edmonton Elks put out a statement, is pleased by Wednesday's announcement by the CFL that discussions with the XFL has ended. The Elks remain fully committed to the CFL and our treasured brand of Canadian football. Pleased by, hey man, whatever floats your boat. Pleased by, he says. The Elks say. There is definitely, this story is not over. Especially when the Elks put that out, because we were all like, bro, what? Did you really have to say pleased? I'm saying I think there is a big ownership fracture. So this article goes on to say that while the CFL's decision Wednesday allows it and the 9-member teams to concentrate solely on the 21 season, it hasn't resolved the Argos issues and only served to raise questions about the future of the franchise, most notably its current owner. MLSC spokesman Dave Hageth said Thursday the organization's sole focus is, quote, on the CFL's return to play this season, and that's what we're excited about for both the league and its fans. Now, MLSE and the Toronto Argonauts, all intents and purposes, has spent a lot of money bringing a lot of players in, and they seem to be ramping up their game, so to speak. So I don't know what's going on with that, even though they've been criticized in the past. Now, at first glance, it would appear that the company has three options to consider moving forward. Now, if MLSC did not want this out, there would be quotes in there saying, we didn't want this out there, or we disagree with this, this is not going to happen. This is out there for a reason. One, having Toronto join the XFL. This is a Canadian reporter saying this who had the scoop earlier. So dude is connected. That's my whole point to this whole thing. He is connected. I will tell you this. Dan Ralph and Mike Mitchell are the two most connected people when it comes to the XFL CFL talks. Farhan Lalji, Dave Naylor, they're tier 2. Everybody else doesn't know what they're talking about. They talk to the dang equipment manager. They're talking to, 3 stacks down. These guys are talking to the people that matter the most. That's why when he wrote this article, I was like, what? So having Toronto join the XFL when the spring resumes play in 2023 because it's much easier to reach a deal with one team rather than 9 franchise league. Now, I don't know the legalities, and neither do you. But like I said, this is put out there with no, hey, this is BS. Another option, selling the Argos in time for the 2022 season. Or continuing owning the franchise and negotiating a better business model structure for the CFL moving forward, giving the team is in the biggest markets, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, are struggling. Trouble is, the league is unique and has 3 different models in place with community-owned teams. Oh, Winnipeg, Saskatchewan, and Edmonton. Right. Remember we talked about old money, new money, homers versus, people who want change, your VCRs versus your Roku. You feel me here? Those are privately owned. Hamilton. Yeah, Hamilton Tiger Cats. Next Grey Cup champion, BC Lions, and of course Montreal. And 3 owned by conglomerates, Toronto, Calgary, and Ottawa. The second option, so that was it. And I'm like, okay, you just throw that out there, and that's it. But dude continues to go down the path. The second option, though, could be somewhat tricky given the tough sell Argos. So they skipped the first one and go right into the one about selling the team. The second option could be somewhat tricky given the tough sell Argos football had been in Toronto. The franchise averaged a league low 12,000 spectators in 2019. Last time they played a game, that figure was more like 10,000, under the league's average of 22,000. When MLSE purchased the Argos in 2015, the club had made the move to Rogers Centers to BMO Field, figuring the change of scenery from the Dome Stadium to the open air near Lake Ontario would result in better attendance. It hasn't. There's no question the depth of the MLSE's pockets. It's estimated reportedly valued at $1 billion, but the company is not in the business of losing money. And for the second option to work, they need to find a willing purchaser who, under the current circumstance, may be hard to find. This is called leverage, my friends. Any sale of the Argos would likely have to carry the caveat of a favorable lease at BMO Field to help offset the franchise's losses. Although the City of Toronto owns the facility, MLSE manages it. But the question remains, if MLSE can't sell the Argos in time for the 2022 CFL season, will the Toronto franchise operate north of the border? If it does not, what impact will it have on the league? They want this out there. They're like, bro, any sale of this team that you're thinking of will carry the caveat of a favorable lease at BMO Field, just in case you were wondering. This is like, we're getting into some like stuff here. Goes on to say they've been suggestions the CFL changes business model to adapt to revenue sharing to help struggling franchises. However, the big question remains just how much money is available to split up, especially during a pandemic and at a time when no club took in any revenue in 2020. Because the league didn't play, the CFL's 3 community-based teams lost a combined $21 million in 2020. The 3 franchises traditionally posted annual profits prior to the pandemic. Some league officials are quick to suggest that CFL already operates in a form of revenue sharing and that the 9 teams split up equally the money generated from broadcast agreement with TSN. And shortly after the league canceled plans for the season last August came suggestions that revenue sharing would be on the table as it looks to change the business moving forward. So for the first time, CFL coaches return to the field, blah, 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 with storm clouds looming over the horizon. Again, this didn't come from, and this got parroted by another site that I believe is connected to the XFL and CFL stuff, and that is Pro Football Talk. My friend Mike Florio, who I'm not a fan of, so apparently he doesn't write anything negative about the XFL anymore. Gee, I wonder why. Hello, Peacock. I see your feathers. So this, to me, was super interesting. And where it came from, I mean, if this came from any other writer, maybe if Dave Naylor wrote this or Farhan Lalji wrote this, I would be like, yeah, but Dan Ralph wrote this, and I'm like, bro, there is a lot here, and this story isn't over yet. So the question is, how would this even work? Now, I don't know the legalities. Clearly, they would never say anything, but it makes interesting what potentially the XFL's timeline could be going forward. So we have one of the stories, we broke the story. It's actually we didn't. That there's a 50% off sale on XFL Shop XFL. Basically, they're getting rid of all their merch. They did the jersey sale, tried to unload those, and now they're just unloading everything. So clearly there's a change coming. We know the league is going to start in 2023. You have Christmas season. They would be absolutely dumb to not have something set up so that they can make some money during the Christmas buying season, whether it's season tickets, whether it's merch, new merch. You get new business partners doing the merch. Hello, Under Armour. How are you? Doing the merch for them. That all stuff needs to be set up soon. So how does this play out based on the timeline that I've talked to you guys about? I was saying by August they need to have a CFO. Now that this is over, and it's kind of, I get both sides. I mean, to me, it's a relief in some respect because it was like, do we even want to go there? And if all we really wanted was Toronto to begin with, then you can get Toronto without the drama. It just makes things interesting. And you got to read the tea leaves and see how things could play out. So if the XFL, I would assume in the next month or two, I bet you they're ready to pull that trigger soon on a CFO. That's going to be phase 1. Phase 2, by August, they have to have new merch and potentially an announcement about some kind of merger or new franchises or something. All they have to do is tease that 2 teams are coming in 2023. Because if Toronto Argonauts were to jump on board, we would need to know that as soon as the CFL season is over in December. Which I could see waiting until the CFL. I'm sure that they don't want to burn any bridges. We could tell if they did, if Toronto get eliminated from the playoffs and the next day that says Toronto Argonauts are not going to play in 2022 season in the CFL, but they're joining the XFL, which would be freaking shockwaves across the universe. And this is when we'll know. So if the XFL makes any kind of announcement about, and they might even wait, but again, if you're waiting on announcing 2 teams until 2022, you're kind of missing out on all that merch and excitement and build-up. You're missing out on 2 franchises. I mean, if you have a team in Mexico in place by October and merchandise to go with it, it's going to blow up. You're going to sell a ton of stuff. And you're going to need to have season ticket packages set up too. So the question is, are we going to get a new team or not? I mean, if the Toronto Argonauts are going to be part of the XFL, which I'm like, dude, I can't even see that. But I didn't think The Rock could be the owner of the XFL. if this was going to happen, it would have to happen in January. The Toronto Argonauts would have to say in January that they're out because they would could they keep their coach? Like, what happens to the players? You got to there's a whole thing that needs to happen. They can't wait until 2023. So the XFL would know pretty soon if MLSE is out. Like, what's going to happen? That's the biggest question going for the next couple months. Or in October, we get an announcement that, there's a team in Mexico and there's a team in Toronto, and that's it. And then the Argos are stuck in the Argo world of the CFL. With the whole thing with like this whole, if you check out CFL News Hub, this whole thing about like not paying some of their players, like nickel and diming about something. We'll talk all about that on the CFL News Hub show on Wednesday at 8. That kind of made me like, again, I read the tea leaves. I don't care what you say. It's like kind of what's really going on, and like not paying the players some money that they said I don't know what the deal is. Like, that just seems just all kind of shady. So as much as it was quiet, it was like, oh, I guess this is it, and then we're just going to get our 8 teams and move forward. This makes it interesting. Like, I don't know. So let me know in the comments, and let me know whether you're on Facebook or the YouTubes, or send me a message. Do you think the Argos would jump to the XFL? Because here's what happens. If the Argos jump, Montreal might not be too far behind. And then what does the CFL have? And I forget who talked about it. And maybe remind me in the chat. But if Toronto moves out of even though they're not the biggest money maker, they're the biggest market, that could have a crippling effect, or at least a dramatic effect to the CFL. You lose your number one TV market, and the CFL becomes this kind of minor league thing without Toronto. And then Montreal might follow suit too, because they might be like, we can make. But if the XFL is going to make a move for a TV partner, it would be interesting. They could get away with it as if they said, we are going to have a team in Canada, and what that team is is unknown at this time. And that stuff could get leaked. Who knows what's going on? But man, I thought it was like, oh, okay, this happened and it's over, and now we're just kind of moving forward. And then all of a sudden, and I thought about the Toronto thing. I was like, man, that'd be something. But I'm not saying anything, because if I say something, my head would get cut off. But Dan Ralph said it, and Dan Ralph will be on the Markcast this week. So I hope Reed and Paul ask him about how he got his quotes. I don't want to put the guy on the spot. But his connection, there is no doubt his connection. He's got a good sources when it comes to this stuff. He is the best, most sourced guy, aside from our own Mike Mitchell, involved in this stuff. And when he says it, it makes it really interesting. So let me know what you think in the chats. Let me know what you all think leave a comment. Shoot me a message. This is an interesting story that's not going to go away for a while. And I'm not, like I said, there's some logic behind it, but the fact that the XFL said international in their little press release, and Mexico and Canada are in play for teams, that was a shot to me across the CFL's bow that, hey, we're doing this without you because you couldn't get your freaking community owners that didn't want to get on board with what we have, so we're just going to steamroll over you now. We gave you an opportunity. Good luck. And we'll see the Argos hit the field in the XFL, which would be insane. But then there's comments. We'll get into them, your social media stuff, because people bring up some great questions. We'll get into that later. So I know it's a crazy thing. Hey, man, I haven't talked to you guys in a while. What's up, everybody in the chat? We'll get to your chat stuff as well. I haven't got a chance to hang with you, but we'll get to you guys. And it's been a while, and this has been some crazy news. And I got 12 hours in a car ride. I listened to the full Markcast. I listened to some CFL stuff, some Bitcoin. Oh, can I say that word without getting like hurt? Whatever. You know what? Coin stuff. Hours of this stuff. Old episode. Like you got 12 hours in a car. Kids are sleeping. Wife is sleeping. You're driving straight up 95. You got a lot of stuff to listen to and a lot of things to kind of. I mean, that was a great time for me to just kind of process everything. So it's been insane. All right, we're going to get to our commercial break. We got a great conversation between Josh Davis and AJ Smith. Thanks for joining us on the show, my friends. We will hit this, and then we'll get back to your social media stuff and our friends in the chat room. I see you all in there. We'll be back after this. Stay tuned, my friends.